Welcome to Uriah Heep, the Magician's Podcast. I'll be covering every studio song the band has recorded and every bonus track that I can find. Each week we'll go over a new song from the beginning to where they are currently, and as they keep adding albums, I'll keep adding shows. Let the deep dive party begin.
In the magic garden, some were singing, some were dancing.
So let's dig into I Won't Mind by Uriah Heep from the album Wonderworld. See, I could have been a DJ.
I that was flawless. I thought I was listening to the radio for a moment. It brought me back to those old FM rock stations that used to exist.
I took a class on Casey Kasem, and which was brought to us by a letter from... No, just kidding. Okay, let's stop it here for a second. Well, I guess I already did. So there's a lot going on here. This is a really different kind of song for Heep. It's really kind of dramatic in a way that we're not used to hearing from them. I love the tones we're getting. It sounds a little bit like a synth bass to me, doesn't it?
Yeah, but I love that bass line. It's so simple, but it has such a great groove, and that low note just echoes that deep, rich, low bass sound.
Yeah, I really feel like it's something that you feel almost, and this is going to be weird to say probably, but almost like in your pelvis, where it's just like your center of gravity. Yeah. And I love that. I love that he's playing something very simple here, which is not very common for Gary. He's usually very adventurous on the bass, as his predecessor Paul Newton was. But I really like it. It's almost guttural, this opening.
When they go down to that note, dun, 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 you feel it. You feel it.
Absolutely. And I love the guitar sound. It sounds like there's a little bit of a delay on it as well, but just a great tone.
Yeah, and what I like about it is that it sounds sharp in a way, but it also sleazy. Kind of has like but the first time I heard this, it reminded me almost a little bit of Aerosmith in a way.
Okay.
Where they just sort of have those like sleazy guitars that kind of will snake in, almost bluesy, but it's not a blues riff, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of feel like this could have been put in a movie where they're going like they're panning through, like, let's say a dive bar. And then out of the corner, like you see the stage where the band is playing or whatever, and there's like one girl that's dancing by herself, and I just kind of like it. It just has that feel of something that could work with that.
And there's a detective with a 5 o'clock shadow drinking that 70s can of
Budweiser and his shot of whiskey next to him, and his tie is halfway untied, and he's just like, ugh.
I'll punch you in the mush, see?
Stop looking at me, hippie.
Well, let's see where it goes from here. I realized that I broke a rule on my own show just now, and I kind of feel bad about it. I never, ever interrupt a Mick Box solo. That's pretty much the only rule I have on the show, is that you never. So it was really great bringing all these shows to you guys. Brandon, thanks for coming on. I'm just gonna
pleasure is all mine.
Up. I think though, the term that I want to use for this, especially with the guitar sound, is raw. It just sounds very raw.
Yeah. It does sound very raw. And what's standing out to me too is that, obviously the bass is a low sounding instrument, but he's really hitting that low sound. But the guitar is really balancing it with that almost screechy high notes at point. And it sounds like he's got a slide on. to me.
Yeah, I think so. But I also think that the way that it's EQ'd is it sounds screechy, but it's not ear piercing. Because a lot of times when you get up in that frequency, it's just like you just feel like, oh my God, I've got to stick something in my ear to block that sound out. But this is really pleasant. It's like not even on the edge. It just sounds good.
Yeah. And he doesn't live there either. You know, he goes, bow, bow, wow, and kind of brings it back down. So he just sort of teases it, you know, it's where it's like, if it gets any higher, this could hurt. But
right.
he backs off. It's sort of like, it's just sort of like teasing and then a release.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's Rock and Roll Hall of Fame material as far as I'm concerned.
So far, I agree.
Well, I don't mind if you steal my last name. Just leave me anytime, and I'll get along fine. I don't really know why, but I know I'll get by. If I don't, I'll die trying.
Okay, well, I was going to cut it earlier, but I didn't cut it off quick enough to prevent the solo starting, and I wasn't going to do that again. I'm sorry, Mick. I love that you endorsed the band. I hope that I still have your endorsement after cutting off your solo there. A lot to unpack here. I love the vocal.
Yeah.
I think there's a slight echo and delay going on there that kind of brings out a little bit of depth and dimension. But I love this. It feels like just a really good bluesy-ish rock and roller.
Yeah. You know, when you first hear this song, it sounds almost a little, I don't want to say generic, but like you've heard it before. Mm-hmm. But when you listen to it closely, there's so many subtle things that they're doing. All these slight variations and really smooth transitions that are so interesting to listen to. You know, just I believe it's on the line, just leave me anytime, that third line there where they sort of start doing more of a walk almost, then they kind of break from that bass groove and do a little bit more of a walk. And it's just really well done. And this is what I was talking about when I said it reminds me a little bit of Metallica. I can picture them doing a Metallica version of this song where it starts with that bass groove and it builds up slowly because they have so many songs that do that. And then you just sort of, as they would just, when they get there to do the walk, they would just make it more of a gallop, like a
right. Yeah. Yeah. Double picking and that. Yeah. I think you're right.
Yeah.
And I love the varied tempos in this too. I love that it's just not a solid boom, tap, boom. Like it's got some changes in there, which gives it a little bit of character. But
and that really smooth like transition at the end too. Yeah. Ba-da-dum, ba-da-dum, dum.
I have to wonder though, like what you said at the beginning about it sounding familiar. I kind of feel like anything that starts off that simply or appears to start off that simply, I kind of feel like I automatically think I've heard it before because it's like, you can't write something new that's that simple. That has to be something that was done a long time ago by like 5 different bands.
Sure. And that's sort of the charm of it, right? It because it's instantly familiar to you, you know?
Right.
And there was a song I mentioned before, reminded me of something maybe Metallica
would do on Load and Reload too, because there's a song in Reload called Devil's Dance, and it's built around this bass groove. But when I heard that song, I thought of Another One Bites the Dust, because it's kind of instantly familiar in its simplicity. And, you know, there's so many. It's funny because there's a lot of rock songs that are based around a bass groove, but there's only a handful of classic ones that I feel like do it really well. And this one, I think, does it really well.
I would agree. And I can tell you as a more experienced Heep guy, it's really interesting to hear something built around a bass groove because usually the bass is much more melodic with this band. It's very, very adventurous. And it's rare that you hear something that's just playing the foundation a little bit more. So it's definitely different, but pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm digging it.
Let's see what happens.
If it rains again, I'm gonna fly to the sun, 'cause another just waiting and wondering. I just got to keep trying. Looking for gold in the sky gets kind of rough. Maybe I'm to blame 'cause I didn't look hard enough.
You know, I was thinking, and I meant to mention this earlier, but I didn't hear any keyboard until just that part that rolled in there. I hadn't noticed a single keyboard or piano or anything prior to that.
Yeah, it was really just built around bass, guitar, and then the drums enter late, if I recall.
Yeah.
And then the vocals, so they're really layering. It's like one member at a time entering and building to this moment.
You know, it's interesting too. I feel like a lot of their songs are structured that way, where it's kind of like, okay, have you seen the movie Poltergeist? The original one? Okay. So in the beginning, they're following the dog around, and the dog basically takes you to every character that's a part of the family and introduces them into the movie, right? So like he goes to the teenage daughter, then the little girl, and then her brother, whatever the order is, and then the parents. And you get like a sense of each person being added into the mix. I kind of feel like they do that a lot too, where they're like, okay, here's what these guys are doing. Now here's the next person. Now here's the next person, kind of just introduce everybody into the song, which is really cool because you get to understand what everybody's part in that song is, because your focus changes instead of just hearing everybody playing at once and trying to dissect it.
Yeah, that's a great... I would have never made that comparison, and that's a beautiful way of doing it. Perfectly said.
This might be the first time Uriah Heep has ever been compared to Poltergeist.
Or anything for that matter, other than the Poltergeist reboot. Like, but
oh man, don't get me started on that. I have thoughts and feelings.
No, I was just gonna say, I also just love the melody in this, and there's so much soul coming through in the vocal, and there's a lot of simplicity in this song. Like, it's not an overly original or complicated vocal melody, but it's very well done, and just it fits perfectly around the instruments.
Yeah, I often say on these shows that I think David Byron was just a master of telling stories, in doing it in a way that made you feel like they're really happening while he's singing them, or he's got such a strong memory as he's recanting a story. It's really amazing, because a lot of singers can sing a song well. They can nail all the notes, they can put the right inflections, and it's believable. But there's a difference between a lot of singers and what some of these guys, especially from this era, could do, was really make you feel like you're a part of that story.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's true. And I think that's something that's lost sometimes in, not to pull the old man card again, but lost in music these days, where I just feel like there's less songs that tell a story. And, there's so many songs that fit more into like verse, chorus, which again, I understand, but I love a song that really just tells this grand story. I mean, Tom Waits is one of my all-time favorite songwriters. So is Nick Cave, and both of them are just masters of telling these stories about these characters. And not that this song is necessarily going that far in that direction, but I can see a similarity there where, as you said, this story is kind of unfolding for us.
Right. And, I'll make probably another first time ever Uriah Heep comparison would be Reba McEntire. And for somebody who, as far as I know, she only wrote one song out of everything that she's had hits with and recorded. She's only wrote one song. And that was after her band died in a plane crash when they were on their way to whatever part of the tour they were doing. And she did not go with them, obviously, but they all died. And so that was the only song that she wrote was about that. But she knows how to tell a story. She knows how to make you feel like this really happened and I'm still upset about it. And this is how it's affecting me. And you just get drawn in by her delivery so much that you don't think about the fact that this isn't even a story that she wrote. You just feel like she lived it. And I very much feel the same way with David Byron as a vocalist, that you just feel like everything he sings, he was there. Like this is his life he's singing about, not some lyrics he wrote down on a piece of paper.
And that's really what makes great vocalists, because, you know, it's one thing to have this technically proficient voice, and that's admirable, but it's the performers that have one that pull it off well is because they make it believable with emotion in their delivery. And if you look at somebody like, you know, Johnny Cash is one of my all-time favorite vocalists. It's nothing to marvel at. He's not a technically proficient singer to the same level of like an opera singer or a Ronnie James Dio, but it's the emotion, it's the delivery, it's the power of that voice. He can sell it, you know? So selling the lyrics, selling the melody is such a huge part of being a vocalist. I think sometimes it's underrated. And I think it's the same thing with, you know, James Hetfield. He's not the most skilled vocalist, but he has that signature bark that just delivers his message.
Right. And he's somebody that is a very solid singer at what he does. He doesn't have a huge range, but in the range he sings in, he is rock solid as a singer.
Yeah, and I think he has there's an underrated soulfulness in his voice too that a lot of people who maybe do not listen to the band might not recognize, or even they do might not fully appreciate.
Well, listen to their cover of Turn the Page or When a Blind Man Cries, and I think you really get to see a little more of the dynamics that he actually has that just in general don't suit their songwriting.
Absolutely agree. And that's another reason too why I feel like, again, I could picture Metallica covering this song, because I know that Hetfield could deliver this vocally beautifully.
Yeah, I agree with that. But who is the singer that you were just talking about?
Johnny Cash?
Johnny Cash. Equally, I would like to see Johnny Cash do some Ronnie James Dio songs.
Yeah. Hey, if he can pull off Nine Inch Nails and Soundgarden, you never know.
That's true. If William Shatner could do a rock album, then I think he could do a couple of Dio covers, maybe a Rainbow in the Dark, something not too difficult, you know?
Just a rainbow in the dark.
Oh my God, he'd start the song like that too.
Hello, I'm Johnny Cash. Man in Black, just a rainbow in the dark.
And he'd have the girls, and he'd still have the girls throwing their tops at him. I guarantee it.
And this is like 80-year-old Cash too. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Oh man.
Maybe I'm to blame 'cause I didn't look hard enough. But I still get the feeling that it shouldn't be so tough. So I won't mind. Wow, oh mind.
Man, I love Mick's playing on that. You just feel it.
Yeah.
There's something, and it's interesting again to compare it to blues, but there's just something about a blues guitarist, the way they solo, you feel it in your bones.
It has that wail, right? You think of like a blues vocalist has like sort of that emotional, sad wail, and a great blues guitarist can mimic that in their own way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very much so. It's that same feeling that you get from the lyricist, and you feel. I remember, I can't remember which guitar player it was. It might have been Steve Morse. I did a master class with him last year, and he was talking. I think it was him. He was talking about how the guitar solo has to be at least on par with the vocal, if not better. But
Right.
you have to be careful. You don't want to overshadow the singer coming in for that last verse. But I feel that because if your singer's creating a great level of emotion and then you come in with a half-ass solo, you're going to ruin the song. And then it's going to be hard for the listener to come back and get back into that emotion when the singer starts the last verse. So it makes sense. I never really put it into terms before.
Yeah. Can I say too that going back to the bass for a moment, this is really he's really putting on his own masterclass right now about the role of a bassist. When you listen to this, there's so much variation what he's doing, from the initial bass groove that really lays the foundation of all the instruments that are built on top of it, to, you know, the more melodic playing that comes in when the full band's kicked into, the more driving, simplistic bass line that's more traditional drum and bass rhythm section. He's really nailing everything a bassist should do in a band in this one song. And he's doing it really well at the right moments.
Exactly. He's a very tasteful. And even when and there was a part where he was getting a little more adventurous and just getting away from the root note playing, which is more like the sound that I'm used to from him. But he does it to where he ventures out, but I feel like he still restrains himself enough to know what's too much for the song, like where I can go. And then, you know what, I need to dial it back, because if I go any further, it's going to be too much. Like, he just knows where that line is and doesn't cross it.
But it works in this song too, because it's providing almost a counter melody to the vocals in a really beautiful way, especially when the guitar in this song's not really very melodic in it, in terms of playing a traditional melody, because it's really a continuous solo throughout. I mean, it's a melodic solo, don't get me wrong.
Right.
But you know, it's not, its role in this particular song is not to play the melodic line or to follow the vocal. It's to interject those solo parts throughout. And so the bass is sort of picking up the slack in certain sections and kind of providing a counter to what the vocalist is doing, and adding that underlying melody that is really fills up the sound. So it does not sound like empty or hollow. It makes it sound really full and rich.
Yeah, and it's interesting because since there's no real organ in this song, I mean, we're used to hearing a very distorted and heavy Hammond B3, really thickening things up. I don't feel like this song is lacking for sound at all. I feel like it's pretty rich and full. I am hearing a second guitar track here and there in my left ear, whereas the main guitar is in my right, unless my headphones are backwards. But I think it sounds really good. I think adding anything more might be a little bit too much.
I agree. And I think this is a sign of a great rock band. Like, think of a band like Black Sabbath, who, you know, had such a big sound with one guitar, or a more contemporary band, Pantera, right? One guitar. And these, I know there were overdubs and studio stuff, but still, when you see them live, there's not a second guitarist on that stage, and they have this big, huge sound. I think that's when you can have minimal musicians on stage and still sound like you're this big band. I think there's a lot to say about that. And, you know, trust me, I love the spectacle of Iron Maiden with three guitars on stage at the same time. But there's something when you just have one guitar, one bass, one drummer, one singer, and you can still make that huge sound. That's really impressive.
I think even to take that a step further, I would look at a band like The Police, who is just a three-piece. Yeah. And man, even live, they really sounded like a full band.
Yeah, and I was thinking too, as I was talking, White Stripes with you know, to even let's minus one.
Right.
But I will say, you know, I like Jack White. I'm not the biggest Jack White fan, but I like him. And my wife and I saw him live. And I think his guitar sound at this particular show, at least, was the loudest guitar sound I've ever heard live. And I've seen Metallica numerous times. I've seen death metal bands. This was the loudest guitar I've ever heard.
Nice. And of course, it got really crazy in the 80s, because in the 80s, you literally had two people on stage, but it sounded like a full band because everything was sequenced in the pop world. I was so let down. I've been to the Lost 80s live show because they do the final show of the tour here in Las Vegas every year. And obviously not this past year, but It's just so weird to see like one full band get up there and play, and then the next one is literally a singer who does nothing but sing, and a keyboard player who is making all of the sounds for the rest of the band. It's just such a weird dynamic to watch nothing and hear a full band.
Yeah,
it's still. I mean, every time I see it, it just throws me off. Like I'm like, why wouldn't you just get musicians for the tour and make it look impressive? It's hard to get into that. It's just a weird thing.
And that's the thing too, going back to this song is that makes it even more impressive. Or a band like Sabbath was like, that technology was not developed at that point. Like they had to pull it off live in the studio. They had to pull it off live on stage, and they had to recreate that big sound.
Yeah. And bands that knew what they were doing, like these guys, did it in spades for sure.
Definitely.
All right.
Looking for gold in the sky gets kinda right. Yeah, maybe I'm to blame 'cause I didn't look hard enough. But I still get the feeling that it shouldn't be so tough. So I won't mind.
Yeah, I cut it off before he really started, so that counts. I really like what I'm hearing here. I am now hearing a little bit of keyboard, a little bit of Hammond organ blended in there, but it's just mixed so tight that it doesn't stand out like I'm used to hearing. But it's slightly to the left in my headphones.
Mm-hmm.
Some great playing from Lee Kerslake, who we haven't talked about. Just solid drumming, keeping the foundation, but keeping it interesting, changing it up in different parts.
Yeah,
I just love the feel of the song.
Yeah, it really, like I said before, it's simplistic on the surface, but very subtle things are happening on drums, on bass, on guitar, on each part that's really impressive in its own right because of the variations, because of the transitions. It's a really smooth arrangement.
Mm-hmm. And I don't want to bash Metallica, so I don't mean to do it, even though I'm kind of gonna. One thing I really like about Uriah Heep is I've never felt like anything that they've done that I'm familiar with has been cut and paste. Now, maybe when I get into the 80s era, I'll feel that way a little bit more. But it's like every chorus is done a little bit differently. Every verse is done a little bit differently. And if I think of a song like Disposable Heroes, I kind of feel like with Metallica, like this is the way the verse goes, this is the way the chorus goes. It's very exacting, which is fine. Yeah. I mean, that's their style. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I do like having a little bit more of a variety, more of, I like this verse in the way it was done versus here's how all the verses were done.
No, I think that's fair. And because, Metallica is not a band that is really going to jam, right? Even, if they do a jam at a concert, it's like a 2-minute thing because they're filling time while somebody's doing something, and it's really going to fall apart quickly. They're not a band that's really known for jamming, but like this song, you can tell that all these musicians are probably great in jam sessions, great improvisers. There's a looseness there. That if that's not the case, that's at least coming through to me as a listener, because they're very tight, but there's a looseness that allows for, again, I'll use that word, variety, and little subtle changes here or there. So I agree with you. Not every part is exactly the same. There's enough similarities to connect each section, so there's a coherent arrangement, but it's not. It does feel like there's subtle differences in the performance.
Well, I'll give you a quick kind of reference. The album, you may not know it, it's a Chick Corea album, but it was done by the Electric Band. So you're talking, Dave Weckl, John Patitucci, Frank Gambale, like some of the best jazz musicians in the world. They get together, They do this album called Inside Out. And when you look at the sheet music, it's basically just black ink. I mean, it's just such a sea of notes. You can't even read it. It's not discernible.
Yeah.
And I met the drummer, Dave Weckl. He came out to do an autograph signing when I was working for a chain of music stores, and we opened up a store in Colorado. and he was playing in Boulder the next night. So he flew out a night early to do an autograph signing. And so as I walked him out to the car at the end of the night, I said, I haven't really gotten to spend any time with you, but I do have one question for you if you don't mind. He said, sure. And I said, I heard that the album Inside Out was written and recorded in 2 weeks. And he just smiled and he shook his head and he goes, no, it was less. The album is just insane. But I think part of what it is when you have musicians that are at the top of their game, like I feel like Uriah Heep was at this, even up to this point, I think there's a certain level of trust where they just say, the parameters of the song, what key we're in. We're all going to listen to each other. We're all going to be aware of where each other is at, but also feel free to be adventurous within those parameters because we trust each other. We're comfortable enough. We've done a few albums together now. And I think they have that room with each other to be able to do that. I don't think a lot of bands necessarily have that with each other.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And you can tell the
bands that know each other, right? You know where when you play with the musician for long enough, you tend to know what their strengths are, what their limitations are, and you tend to know sort of where things are going, even when you have no clue where it's going, because there's little subtle, they might give you a look or might give you a nod or might, have a signature lick that they play that, means they're going to lead to here or whatever the case may be. You just get to know the nuances of that player just from playing with them. And for a band like Heep, that's, think of all the shows, all the touring, all the jamming, all the playing. Like there's so many years that go into that. And that's why I think, you see most bands, not every band, but most bands do their best work 2, 3, 4 albums in, because they need that time to develop and start clicking as songwriters and as performers. And you just get to know each other a little bit better. So you build up and eventually you plateau and reach sort of that artistic peak.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And I think that too, it's also learning to deal with the pressures on top of that, like the record company saying, well, you've got to get an album out in a month and you have to do this and you have to do that. And you're going to be on tour 4 nights a week while you're doing that. And, all the pressures, especially back in the 70s, that bands were just pushed to the limit by record companies. There's so much pressure that people don't think about when they judge an album or a band. It's a lot to hold up to.
Yeah, I absolutely agree.
I often wonder too, and maybe you can shed some light on this with Metallica. I think about how long they were putting the songs together for, say, Kill 'Em All. That wasn't just, hey, we wrote an album, we found a record company, we released it. That was a long time of playing together with a different guitarist. But those songs were very established for those guys. Then they get a record deal. Okay, we want another album. Well, it took us like 4 years to put those songs together. So we get in 4 years. Yeah. What are we getting? The pressure changes completely. And some bands will be able to work with that and some bands won't. And a lot of bands don't have a successful album after that amazing debut because they can't hold up to that pressure.
Sure. Yeah.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of Uriah Heep, the Magician's Podcast. If you have enjoyed this show, please consider going over to Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast outlet, leaving a rating or a review. Be sure to subscribe to make sure that you are notified when new episodes are available. Please be sure to share this podcast with your fellow Uriah Heep enthusiasts and anyone who you think would like Uriah Heep, which should be everyone. And if you are so inclined, please feel free to contribute to the Patreon account. And if you are not a Patreon subscriber, you can also pay through the PayPal link on the website listed in the show links below. I would also like to thank Uriah Heep for their very generous support of the show, and thank you guys for listening. We'll see you in the next episode. Happy days!